start. Nobody else have something? It is 6 o'clock. We'll call to order the public hearing on the ad hoc committee report on town manager / town administrator committee. Ryan Hanson was the chair of that. If you want to make your presentation, we'll open up for questions from the public.
Okay, I'll try to be brief, but essentially, we had asked to have this study based on the fact that we were concerned about the fact that Rollinsford may not have a very robust support for its administrative staff. Essentially, what the committee decided to do is we took a look to see how other towns in this state of New Hampshire were handling this. And what we did is we identified 15 towns that had equal tax base and equal population to Rollinsford. And from that, we tried to see how they were handling things. What we were surprised at was out of all those towns, there were 11 towns with professional administration. 2 of them were town manager, the balance were town administrators. One of the things that we were surprised at were the ones that had town manager had town manager for several years, some 30 or 40 years, surprisingly enough. And the ones with town administrators, most of them had had town administration for quite some time, professional administrators. There were a few that were more recent. There were only 4 towns in our study that had neither. And by the way, one of those towns, as I recall, had a town manager, and there was some reason that they weren't happy. I wasn't ever able to find out exactly what had happened. Of the ones that had town manager for a long time, one of the towns had, in fact, voted 1 year, a few years ago, to get rid of the town manager, and the very next year they voted it back in. So, in general, I think people were happy with the town managers or administrators. The select board size in all the towns were either 3 to 5, most of them were 3. And we noticed that the ones with professional administrators or town managers actually had fewer meetings than the ones that didn't. They mostly met on either every 2 weeks or twice a month basis. So generally the select board didn't meet quite as often. Basically, as to hours, most of the towns with professional administrative staff were open 37 hours a week on the average. Rollinsford is open 20 hours a week on the average, but only Fitzwilliam had fewer hours open to the public out of all the towns we did. Now what we did then was we tried to figure out the administrative costs. And what we did is we looked at the administrative costs of the various towns as a percentage of the 2017 operating budgets, and we did it as appropriated, not as actual, because that's what we had available at the time we were doing our study. The town managers' towns one had 28%, one had 11%, and most of them, what we tried to do was we tried to use the MS 737, and some of the towns had filed them at the time we did it, some hadn't. And what we were doing is we were taking certain lines. We took the administrative and financial lines to try to come up with these figures. Unfortunately, we also noticed that people put different things in those lines, and that made it a little harder. So what we did discover, though, was the towns with the lowest percentage, way lowest, were Mount Vernon, and the other really low one was Bethlehem. And so what I did, and you'll see it in the addenda that I handed out, is I was trying to figure out, because I had already talked to every single town and asked them how many people work there, et cetera, et cetera. And upon discovering that, we found out that out of all the people, we were probably had the least robust administrative staff. And as a result, I couldn't figure out how Rollinsford would have been at around, I think it was like 19%, when in fact there were other towns that were lower, like Mount Vernon. So what I did is I went back and I looked at using exactly what it was that Mount Vernon and Bethlehem did. And when I did that, I looked at their actual salaries and their actual taxes for certain positions, and I used the same positions that they did when I did the figuring. And when I did that, Bethlehem had already announced they were at 5%, Mount Vernon said they were at 7%. When we went back and looked at it, we found out that using the exact same criteria that they did, not using the, the broader thing of the 737, Bethlehem came in at 5.47%, Mount Vernon at 7.23%, and Rollinsford at 6.74%. Now, just for a comparison, and I'm making this comparison for the purpose that we want to look at where we're putting our priorities in the town, is right at the moment, Rollinsford's total administrative support wages are $105,855 for 2017 appropriated. And the same thing for the 3 top positions of the police are $177,149. And I think people are confident that our police department is being run the way they would like it to be run. And the fact is, we're not paying enough attention to this figure is the point of making this comparison. I think we should be looking at this figure more carefully. As I said, again, because we have the least robust of the administrative staff, with a brand new select board, this gives us a critical point. And the reason I say this is because in the past, Rollinsford has really lucked out. We have had some of the greatest people that have been able to spend their time and their education and their energy and devoted almost 40 hours a week to running this town, basically as a select board member. In other words, what we've been doing is depending on what people are willing to volunteer to run the town. That cannot last because at the moment we have probably more information that we've got to be giving to the federal government, more information that we have to be filing with the state, more reports, more things to go with the DRA portals, et cetera, et cetera. And as we go through these things, what's going to happen is if we don't address this issue, we're going to end up with a problem that did happen to one of the towns. And basically what happened is they missed a notification requirement for something they thought was a no big deal, and it shut down the town. We cannot afford to have that happen. The other possibility, obviously, is it will open us up to lawsuits, which would also be frightening. So we are at a critical point. In addition to talking to the towns, we spoke to the stakeholders in the town. And this meant and I would like you and invite you to look at our online report because on pages 4 to 22 we gave the results of our discussions at length with the police chief, with the Board of Selectmen, with the town clerk, with the tax collector, and also with the fire chief. And so the only one I missed was George, and he said he didn't mind, but the fact is we spoke with all of them, and almost everyone agreed that we probably have certain areas that should be addressed. These are areas that can be addressed by a professional administrative staff, but the fact of the matter is, these are big areas. One huge one is this event calendar. This is really big. Right now, we have a situation where right now we're changing over to SB2. As everybody knows, we voted for that last year. So that means there are some changes in how we're doing our reporting functions, how we have to get things to the DRA, how we have to do all of these different things. And the schedules are changing. And because the schedules are changing and the fact that we have 2 budgets now to prepare, you'll have the developed budget and the other budget, it's going to make it more difficult. So essentially, between that and all the other things that have to happen on a regular basis, not everybody knows. If right now, if something happens to anybody in the front office, we may all of a sudden start missing deadlines. And we're going to be in the position that one of those other towns was in, and that would be pretty sad for us. We've lucked out so far, but we don't want to just say, well, we can continue to skate along and hope no disaster happens. But this event calendar, as I say, is extremely important. Essentially, there are ongoing tasks that we have to do, and there are ongoing deadlines. And if somebody had a chance to put together the procedures that are necessary to do this, they might have already developed an event calendar. Part of the reason that that hasn't been done is everybody's working on one fire at a time. in our offices. Everybody's facing one emergency and another emergency, and that's been going on for years. And so basically it's very hard to put something like that together, and everybody agrees it needs to be done. Another issue is policies and procedures. Now that sounds, well, what's policies and procedures? Well, it's pretty important that if we have an ordinance or if there's a law that people are supposed to be obeying, that we want to be able to have procedures and policies in place, so if there's some sort of an ambiguity, that we don't have to worry about the problem of how it's being applied. If you don't have the right procedures in place, you can end up with uneven application. And I don't think anybody wants to see the results of uneven application of any of our ordinances. I think that would end up with a problem, and if we end up with a problem like that, you're opening yourselves up for suit for the town, and I don't think we want that. Another issue is business procedures and redundancies. Now, I don't know if it's still true, but I do know that up until recently, if one person is ill and they can't be here, payroll might not get done because there's no redundancy in the process. That's important. Essentially, no essential functions in town should not be able to be performed because just one person is absent. You need to have redundancies. The way to resolve it is having somebody else in the office is available, trained to carry out the tasks when they're needed, and the procedures, the business procedures have to be put into place and make sure that they're reviewed periodically to make sure that all of these procedures and policies are efficient. You need to have an efficiently running office. Another issue is personnel management. Good personnel management actually requires oversight, and essentially you need policies and procedures that are consistent when you're dealing with employees. Anybody that has their own business understands that. And it also, we have to admit, it's a little harder when you have a volunteer board, but it has to be done, and it is done, but it's a little bit more difficult. Job descriptions need to be made up with goal setting, support, and training, so all the employees that we hire can succeed in their jobs. Another thing that we're looking at is organization of town ordinances. Right now, I think in the other room, there are plans piled up all over the place. I don't know if anybody can find a plan when it's needed. All town ordinances and plans and agreements should be in places that everybody can quickly find them, so you know where they are, so we can do stuff. And if we can have ordinances, should be always reviewed on a periodic basis. If we don't review them, then we don't know if they're up to date or whatever, and then you don't know if they're duplicative, you don't know if they're in conformance with the laws, as the laws are changing. So somebody needs to be looking at all those things. A professional administrator would have that as part of their job, to go through all these things and make sure that these things are happening on a regular basis, because it is difficult. People don't realize just how much work there is just on the everyday thing to do all of these other things. It seems, it just gets out of hand if you don't have enough time or energy to devote to it. As you know, and as I say, one town administrator that I spoke with during the investigation kind of said, well, you know, he says most towns don't realize they may be one administrator away from a lawsuit. And I said, what do you mean? He says, well, a lawsuit could be really expensive, and the cost of an administrator is pretty inexpensive in comparison. And I said, well, probably right there. Communication. Every time our select board meets, we have to have communication to all the different department heads, and we want to make sure that that's good. But there's also the necessity that we also have to have communication with people with the building department and zoning department and all these other things. And because basically what we're discovering is sometimes people apply for a building permits and tax abatements and all these things. We should be able to respond to all of these quickly, when somebody applies for a building permit, we should be able to tell them either, you know, it failed or it didn't fail, or you need to do something else. And I understand from the front office that I've spoken with Andrea Cass, who works on some of these. She doesn't work on the building permits per se, but she's, you know, there's a timeline that we're supposed to tell people whether it's gone through or not. People are calling up and wasting a lot of time saying, well, what's happened with my permit? What happened with this? What happened with that? And that isn't really a satisfactory to run things, because people can't do their other work if they're answering calls for stuff that should be answered. We should have some sort of procedure to get these things out on a regular basis. Also, if we can address all of these areas, I think that people would feel in general that customer service would be improving. So people will feel, you know, if I come to town hall, I am being responded to, my questions are being answered, and, you know, everybody will be happier. And I did notice also, I noticed that there are a couple of areas at the front office that are very, very sticky areas for them. And I don't know if the board has looked at those yet. And one was the elimination of the residence tax. Apparently, according to the people in the front office, there's more time spent on printing and getting out all the things for residence tax, and then people come in and they want to register their car or something and they haven't paid it. And they have to go through and find out that they have or haven't paid it, and they're like, well, I already paid all my taxes, why didn't that get paid? So there's a big discussion about that. And then a lot of residence taxes are being, have to be prorated and given back to people, because they come in, they rent an apartment for a month, and then they move out, and then they have to get their money back. So there's a lot of money that goes back and forth. And so for a $10 tax, $10 a year, it may not be worth it. So, you know, we're going to look at some of those. And the other is the inventory of taxable property. And I do know in my report, you can look inside there. I know that the people in the front office had done some work on these two issues, and it is answered in the report that I filed. And you can find them if you would look online, and you'll see what they've done. And it talks about what they did to research whether these are, you know, viable for us to keep pursuing these monies, or economically viable. So those are some of the things. And the next one is really important, and that's strategic planning. We have a board over the last couple of years that have done tremendous steps forward in dealing with strategic planning. And, you know, one of the things that they did, of course, is they got the capital improvement plan, which was a huge thing. That had been, there hadn't been anything. Then we have the road service management plan, which has been really important. And then finally, they put in the 10-year financial projection. These things are absolutely critical for us to be able to determine whether or not your taxes are going to stay fairly level, or if they're going to shoot up and down as emergencies occur, which we're trying to avoid. So I think that if our board has done these things, it's wonderful, but the problem is, will every board have the time to do it and the energy to do it? And some of these things, with the help of a professional administrator, you might find that you'll make it easier for the board to make sure that these things are done. Which is bringing us to the final thing, and that is continuity. As boards change over the years, you're going to find that what has been an important thing for board members for one board might not be as important for others. So the focus of the board might be different as boards change. And one of the things that's really important is if you do have a professional administrator, that person would be there throughout this time and throughout the process and could remind people, this is the things you have to be doing in the future, this is what the last board was doing. You know, because I can't imagine any board coming in and saying, oh, I'm going to review the last 3 years of minutes or something. I just don't see them doing that and having the time to do it. So it would really help to have some of these, and it would help if we would have some continuity there. Essentially, the salary costs, according to the New Hampshire Department of Labor, would be somewhere in the Dover-Durham area, somewhere between $53,000 and $127,000 a year for full-time plus benefits. I don't know what this town will decide to do, but just if you had an idea what it is, you probably should know that that's where the Department of Labor would be putting it. That doesn't mean you have to have you have to hire anybody full-time. It'll be up to the select board to decide, or to the town to decide. Because the question is now, is whether you want a town manager or you want a town administrator. And the fact of the matter is, if you decide for a town manager, the select board has to cede some of their powers. It requires a change in government. You would have to vote on it next year or the year afterwards, whenever you decided to do it. Remember I told you where one town had had a town manager and they wanted to get rid of it. They had to go to the town and get a vote to get rid of it, and then they had to go to the town again to get a vote to reinstate a town manager. A town manager can be fired only for cause, and a town manager has statutory powers. Among them, they hire and fire everybody in town pretty much. So essentially, again, you're ceding all of that stuff to the person who has been hired. And of course, there are other things that they can do. They'll approve payment of the bills, which is something right now that the board does. They make the deals with all of the people that do business with the town, essentially, and they administer welfare. If you decide on a town administrator, you don't have to change the government. The select board does not cede any of its powers. And when I say can hire or fire at any time, most of the towns, what they do is they put together a contract with the town administrator, and they spell out the duties that they want the town administrator to perform. And the contracts, usually as they start out, are usually a little shorter in term, and if they're happy with them, they might go to a longer term. But that's essentially what they've been doing, according to the different towns we've spoken to. So essentially, those are the things that we discovered. I don't know if you have some big questions. In the back of the study, what we did do is we included the law that talks about what the laws are for town managers, and you can look at that on your own if you wish to, because it is all online. And there's a package in there from the Municipal Association about the differences between town managers and town administrators. So I hope that was somewhat helpful. I have to thank, by the way, Kathy Lamb, who worked very hard with me on this project, and Deanie Hoff, who also worked on the project. I mean, there was a lot of work done to pull this together. And as I say, we finally put together a report, and this is our presentation.
All right, well, thank you. Lorraine, are there any questions from the board before we open it to the public? Thank you to the three of you for all the work you put into it. I know it was a lengthy process. So, any questions from you? Miles?
I think I'm all set right now.
Okay, questions from we'll open the public hearing portion of it. Any questions or comments from the public? Yes, you just have to state your name and address for the recording secretary.
Silly Leopold, when you were talking to all of these other communities, did you find that they had any difficulty in hiring or finding qualified applicants?
They did. There is one town that I spoke to where they had recently had some issue and they were looking for someone, but they had said that they were planning to have one within a few months, but and I asked them if they thought they would see any problems, and they said they didn't really think so. So that's all I can say as to that. Hi, Nancy.
Nancy Dione, 44 Rollins Road. Along with the salaries that you're talking about for a town administrator, do any of the other towns have other bookkeepers or something under the town administrator, so that would...
Oh yes, most of them do. Most of them, and if you look in the report, I think I mentioned how many other employees they have, but most of them have bookkeepers or a financial person to help with that. Again, the towns are a little bit varied in how they handle it. A couple of towns had a part-time administrator, but most of them had full-time. So it may be a thing that each town, I think, should be looking at what they need to do. They need to decide what are the areas that I pointed out they want to concentrate on. And when they do that, then they can start determining what it is that they have to have answered. They can look and say, well, we need more people doing this, fewer that. where I spoke with one town where they have lots and lots of building going on, they had more of their efforts towards building inspection and all of those things. So each town is different in those respects.
Just to follow up to that, so do you anticipate keeping the town, having the town administrator position and keeping the current administrative assistant position?
I'm not anticipating anything.
But you're,
This is,
you're
I'm just saying, I think you
suggesting it
need,
would happen.
my view is the town needs more robust administrative support. I think probably some of the towns have got like a full-time assistant or secretary along with the administrator. And that secretary or whatever may or may not be a financial person besides. They kind of varied in that respect.
So it's adding a position then?
It may be, I don't know, it may well be, because again, I saw very few towns that, you know, we've got the building inspector, we have a few very part-time secretaries that handle like these, taking care of minutes and things like that. But aside from that, we have our tax collector, we have our town clerk, and we have the administrative assistant, and then we have Mr. Clark. And that's basically what we've got. And that's our staff. Almost nobody had such, you know, I spoke with a couple of towns and they kind of said, well, you have just that? And I said, well, that's sort of what we have. And they're going, oh my God, and we thought we were bad. So they're just saying they couldn't believe that we were operating with that kind of a thin thing. I think that's the thing. You know, it may be that we may decide, many of the towns had like a deputy clerk, tax collector to help fill in on that end. You know, that would be cross-trained for both positions. A lot of towns did that. And almost all of them had either an additional secretary or financial person to help with the administrator.
Any other questions or comments? Go ahead.
So since there are no job descriptions for any of the employees, how did you determine the gaps for this position?
What do you mean, the gaps, you know?
The need for an administrator, like,
Well,
so,
we were looking at the fact that we have a lot of things that are going on. Right now, there are so many, you know, like, just like the DRA portal alone, that's a pretty important thing that's going on. That takes a lot of time, putting the stuff through there. Each time we turn around as a town, more stuff is demanded from the state of New Hampshire. And the fact of the matter is, we have somebody doing a lot of that stuff, but when we had, for instance, when I talk about administrative support, for instance, when we were doing the bonding, I think, I can't even imagine how many hours one of our select board members put into that. I would say easily 100 hours, just to do the bonds and not even talk about looking at the bonds. We had 3 different types of bonds. Somebody had to research all those different types of bonds. Somebody had to research how you do it. Somebody had to meet with the lawyers. Somebody had to do all that work. It was just an astounding amount of work. I can't imagine that we should be asking any of our present select board persons to do all that on their own for no money. That's just, you know, that's
so they
just
are paid.
not 100, you know, 100 hours of work for what, 3,000 a year or something. It's not a lot of money. It's essentially a small amount. And I don't think any of the towns have select board members that are paid much more than what we pay. It's in the same bailiwick. But I think the advantage to having a more robust administrative support is that you would be able to have a more diverse board, because you won't have to say, well, I gotta make sure that we have room for somebody who's old and gray and retired, and say that's gonna pick up all the difference in the thing. You can't always you can't always have that. You might wanna have some younger people on the board who would be able to do things and have their expertise in what areas that they have without being expected to put in a 40-hour week, which I don't think anybody can really do if they work or if they have families. It's very difficult. So your advantage to something like that is you do add to diversity of your board. And that's really important, I think, for a lot of people, because the town is always different and you want to have a diverse board.
Questions or comments? Going once.
So I have a follow-up to that.
Sure.
So when you, so have you kind of figured out the delta between what the position was 4 or 5 years ago and what it is today? And, I mean, has it, like, what's increased the requirement for this?
Well, again, I think even when Ed was doing this, he was here all the time, you all know that. He was working all the time. And after he left, Suzanne was here working all the time. We can't keep doing that to people. It burns them out, it's exhausting. And we can't just expect it. And luckily, in both cases, we were talking about people with the education and expertise and the time. And you can't always guarantee that you're gonna have that. These are elected positions. So let's be realistic.
So you're anticipating it will reduce the responsibility of the select board then?
Well, I'm not gonna say it's not reducing their responsibility, it reduces the amount of time that they might have to devote to doing their jobs properly. They will be doing more overseeing unless you go to town manager, but they would be doing more overseeing rather than doing the grunt work. You know, meeting with the lawyers, going and reviewing the contracts and all these other things. That, you know, somebody else is reviewing all this ahead of time and say, I've looked at all of these things, these are your options, how do you want to vote on these, or how do you want to look at it? That's the difference. And I think it's a lot easier and more in the expectation of the board members if they can have someone that does that stuff ahead of time and presents it to them.
Sure.
Two real easy ones. How many total paid employees of the town?
Of this town?
Yeah, about.
Oh, you guys can answer, I mean, for the total number in the whole town, I don't know. off the top
It
of my
varies, her, because the on-call fire department is listed as town employees, so if you're talking about just sort of the, I hate to use the word core, but I don't want to exclude those folks that volunteer their time in their lives to save, you know, property and all. I would say between the police department and this building and the highway department, 15.
And then this is an easy one, hopefully. What is the select board's or select person's job description or charter, or what does it say? And this is probably 300 years old, right? But
It
is there can you guys tell us briefly what your job is supposed to entail? Does it say
Sure.
something like run the town in its entirety? I'm guessing not. It probably says something like, Make
I don't have
decisions.
a computer in front of me, I can pull up the statute, doesn't quite put it quite like that, but it's pretty close. We have responsibilities for the welfare and well-being of the residents. Trying to think what it says. We have fiduciary responsibility to administer the budget as approved by the town meeting, or in this case by the town meeting, the virtual town meeting, they'll have in the ballot box. Let's see.
Overseers of the poor.
We are the overseers of the poor. Let's see. If you're asking what does my day look like, I don't know, I spent about 3 hours in here this morning going through bills, going through the agenda for this evening, going through the whatever it's called, the MS4 permit, which I encourage you all, if any of you have any doubts as to whether or not this town should have more professional administrative support, you can find out what the MS4 will entail. I'm here to take public comment, but you're asking me a direct question, I'll try to answer it. We have responsibility to the EPA for reporting of outflow into the Salmon Falls River, unlike anything you've ever seen before. The MS4 permit, we're one of the MS4 permitting towns that can actually put wastewater directly into a river.
familiar with the
It
program.
is going to take hours.
Yeah.
I encourage you to stay and listen to the conversation because it's going to be, if your eyes aren't glazed over, you should be running to the select board because it's going to be quite the process we have to go through. And it's not just us, it's a number of towns in this ecosystem that go through this. So there's a lot to being a member of the select board. Right or wrong, I mean, I'm not going to give you my opinion as to whether or not we're going to go in any direction like this because I'm only one member, but I'm happy to take any comments or questions from the public. Ms. Leopold.
Sally Leopold, when you were looking at towns with administrators and managers, how did the process expedite on like the policies and procedures and stuff? Was it like 6 months less, a year less? Did it vary?
I don't quite get your
Like,
question.
we're saying our select board is too overburdened to do some of these things, like policies and procedures and job
Well,
descriptions.
we've never done them. We have some of them, but we don't have any. For right now, a lot of things are just not done. We've just not been able to do them. I think that everybody's trying to get them done, but you don't get to it. That's the issue. You know, you try to put them in place, but they don't, you know, and they should all be written, they should all be looked at, and they should all be reviewed periodically. And if you don't have them in place, you can't review them either. And one thing you could be doing is looking at what other towns do, having those reviewed, and then say, okay, we like this, we don't like that, somebody could be doing that work. I mean, there's just all kinds of things like that. And when I say about the different things that I know Kim had asked earlier about stuff, I didn't even go into MS4 permits and things like that, and some of the things that our select board members do besides, which I didn't mention, is they try to go out and meet with some of the other boards and commissions that help towns do things. For instance, the Stratford Regional Planning Commission and things like that, all of those. I mean, you're not just talking about meetings here, but you're meeting with all these other commissions that they may be able to help you with issues. I mean, and if you go to all those meetings, or somebody can do that, you get an idea about, you might find out where you can get grants, you might find out where you can get help on something, and those kinds of meetings are also important.
Anyone else? All right, one last one, we're gonna open the select board meeting.
So I would recommend that the select board take a step to define all of the responsibilities of this position and evaluate whether or not the current staff could be used to fill some of those gaps. Since they're only 12 to 16 hour a week employees, they may be willing to take on some of those responsibilities.
Take it under advisement. Anyone else? Thank you for coming. We're gonna close the public hearing at 6:29. Oh, actually, no, 6:37. I'm gonna watch it off. I'm gonna give Lorraine a moment to clear stuff out. Anyone else?
Thank you,
Want to
Lorraine.
clear their stuff out?
That's good stuff.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lorraine.
All right, we are opening the select board meeting of, maybe just close the doors. Just until they leave. Okay, we're gonna open it, my watch isn't right, but it's 6:38. We'll open the select board meeting for September 24th. First order of business is the approval of minutes. We have from last week, September 10th and September 17th. Did everyone have an opportunity to review them, to make adjustments where they may be needed?
I can't speak to the 10th minutes because I wasn't.
You weren't a member, so you will abstain from that one, Miles.
I did the 10th as well as the 17th. I just had one question for clarification with Salme, and what was my question again?
Oh, it was, who was, it was the New Hampshire Department of Safety.
Okay.
Was that a correction made? Okay. Or was it was just a clarification for you?
I was just the clarification
Okay.
of the, who we were
Yeah,
referring
so
to.
And without objection then, by
It's in the
consensus, we will adopt the September 10th and 17th meeting minutes with a note that Mr. England is abstaining from the 10th because he wasn't a member of that. Community input.
I'm here with Melly, and she would like to be appointed to the Conservation Commission. She attended our last meeting
Come on,
and
please
met
talk.
everybody in the group, and we got 8 minutes on about, 5 weeks ago.
I don't
Oh,
remember
well,
seeing
yeah,
that.
maybe not. Yeah, she gave me a call and said that she wanted to be done. She's on 2 other boards, and
Okay.
and I said, what would you like me to tell people? And she goes, you can tell them whatever you want. She said, but I'm old. So that's what she said.
Okay.
And we've since had
Oh,
a
wait.
couple of conversations where she's called and said, what about this, what about that? So we're still in communication, everything's great, but she just didn't want to do it.
Would you relay back to the board that we thank her for her service? We will send her,
Absolutely,
she doesn't do email, so I don't
Yes.
believe, so
Yes.
I'll try to call her, but if you see her,
Yes.
please, or she calls me,
Right.
And we appreciate her many years of
Yes.
service, so I'm sorry, what was your name again?
Melanie Moisen.
Ellen Wilson. Are you Devin Wilson?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I know your husband's professional.
Oh.
Only because I buy things.
Oh.
Maybe I shouldn't, I should stop, but
So
anyways.
Melanie and another guest attended our meeting in July at the library
Okay.
and observed.
Uh-huh.
And then I followed up afterward and said, you know, our next meeting will be X and such, and if you're interested, you know, please attend again as an observer, or would you consider, you know, the possibility of joining?
Uh-huh.
We have two alternates, Lorraine and Bruce York,
Uh-huh.
neither of whom were interested in
Okay,
this
that was
time
gonna be my
becoming
question,
a
okay.
member, right? So I've been through this enough times, I knew that, so,
Okay.
so Melanie would like to be appointed, and then we do have one more open spot.
For a full member or? Okay, so we'll need to advertise that then. So we already have one out for planning board alternate. At this
Okay.
point, we moved someone up last week,
Yep.
so. Miles, do you have any questions for license? Or Denise, sorry. I was just looking that way already, sorry.
It's okay.
No, you're okay?
She does live in Rollinsford, by the way, just in
Yes.
case you need to know that, you know, 'cause I'm
On Silver Street, did I hear? You recently moved to town or?
about 3 years ago.
Oh, okay.
Which
well
in Rollinsford-
behind, sorry.
Which in Rollinsford is recent.
Yeah.
I'll tell you when my family moved here. Okay, so, why don't we do a motion then?
I would move to accept Melanie as a member of the Conservation Committee.
Second?
Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, well, congratulations and thank you.
Thank you. Very much.
Appreciate you stepping up. Have a nice day.
Oops, sorry.
Any other community input? That was nice. Wonderful. You like those? Any others? If not, you have a second bite at the apple at the end of the meeting. All right, our next is business, department head. The building inspector's not coming in tonight. Fire department is being honored for their work. I can't remember which. The department's being honored for their work. There was an incident down in Newington on the General Sullivan Bridge, or the old General Sullivan Bridge, where I believe our fire chief took someone off literally off the ledge. So we thank
Four of them that did.
four of them. Well, right, fair enough. Four of them that did that. So we thank them for that. And they're being honored in Concord tonight. So with that being said, we usually do alphabetically, but the police chief was here. And I think George has more tonight. So if you want to run, you can.
First of all, congratulations.
Thank you. Shining new key.
To the select board's office, this is the pass card.
Okay.
That will let you into the select board's office and the tax collector's office.
Is that a town hall, even? A front door?
We have a,
He has a front, but
Oh,
that's
yeah,
actually for the
planning
office
board.
itself,
Perfect.
just in case the card
yeah,
does not work.
okay.
Want any excuses that you can't give me? Witness? Sure.
Thank you. First item, purchase order number 1466, made out to the city of Dover. Early this month, we sent the 3 vehicles over to Dover for the yearly inspections, and one of them actually needed to have rear brakes. That was cruiser number 74. So again, purchase order 1466, city of Dover for $400. Just start with mine, I guess.
You move it in a second, and we'll talk about it. So what you're gonna say is, I move purchase order number, and hold my glass number,
Yep.
see whatever the number is,
Okay.
1466 to the city of Dover, in the amount of $400.
Okay, I move that we pay purchase order 1466 to the city of Dover for $400
Or just say for vehicle repairs,
for vehicle repairs.
easier that way.
Second?
Okay, we have that. So, it needs to be done, that's not what my question is. How are we coming along in our vehicle maintenance line?
There's money there.
Okay.
There's money.
Okay. Perfect, all right, any other discussion or questions from either member? All right, so, if none, then, all those in favor of purchase order 1466, say aye.
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 Aye, opposed? All right. You get yours next, right?
The department is looking to evaluate a different kind of external vest that we carry. Vest that we're looking at will actually carry everything but the firearm on the vest itself. So we're actually taking the weight off of the hips and putting it on the shoulders. The vest that we currently purchase, the bullet-resistant vest, are about $700. The carrier is an additional $70. The vests that we're looking at from this company here are $343.73 per person. They actually come with the hard ceramic plate, as opposed to the pliable, not Velcro, but thank you, Kevlar. And these, unless they drop them and break them, do not have an expiration date, where we're replacing the Kevlar ones every 5 years. So in the long run, I anticipate, one, we're going to have less injuries as a result of all the weight on someone's waist, and secondly, we're going to save some money because in the long run, the vests are significantly cheaper. And here's just a quick look at it.
So a ceramic plate
How
stops
Ceramic plates.
a bullet better than Kevlar?
They're just as, they go by classification, 1A, 2, 2A, 3A, 3A, and we're looking
I
at
trust you,
3A, which is what we're currently.
You wouldn't put your officers at risk, it
Yes.
just sounds nuts to
Yeah.
me that that's true, but.
So how heavy is the ceramic plate compared to the other one?
It's not much heavier.
Really?
Yep.
Wow.
And, yeah, I guess, I don't know, I had a question, but you've already answered it, so.
So we're looking to purchase one, evaluate it, we'll let
Okay.
Officer LaJoy wear it for a little bit, evaluate, see what the folks think, and we'll go from there. So I purchased on number 1469 to the Whitmer Public Safety Group for $343.73 for one external body carrier with the assorted pouches, and that will come out of our uniform line item.
You move that, and I have another question.
I move purchase order 1469, Whittemore Public Safety Group for $343.73 for uniforms.
Second that.
Thank you, and I should have added, so I typically, well, we don't get to ask questions until I have to move what's on the floor, but I wrote that rule, so shame on me. If they do happen to drop and it shatters somehow or cracks, can we replace those plates?
Yes.
Or- Okay, you don't have to replace the whole.
No, you don't have to place the whole,
Okay.
Yeah.
Do we
they just slide into the carrier,
Yeah.
like our current vest, they just
Right.
slide into the external carrier.
And maybe you said it and I just missed it. How much are the replacements, do you know?
That I don't know.
Okay. well,
But it's significantly cheaper.
Cheaper than buying
what
Kevlar
we're
vest.
Purchasing now, yes.
So I do have a question. So
Sure.
it's gonna be worn like while they're in the vehicle? Is it,
It's worn 24/7 when they're on duty, yes.
is
And
it flexible enough to, I mean, you're getting one to try it out, obviously, to see if it's comfortable.
From what I've seen, the hospital, the security folks over there wear them, Salzburg PD wears them,
Oh,
Baruch
okay.
PD wears them.
So you have some,
And they all rave about them. What they really like is they're getting a lot of the weight off of their waist and it's on their shoulders. But in 20 years of wearing all that weight on your shoulder, after a while, you might
Might
start
not take
taking
that
your
either,
shoulder
right?
measures, so.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Are there any other questions, comments, or concerns? Okay,
thank you.
we'll move the question then. All those in favor of purchase order 1469, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed? All right. Does Officer LaJoy know that he's a test case?
Yes, he's actually the one
He's
that
already said
submitted the
okay.
proposal to me, so. Okay, the repeater project.
Yes.
There are 2 ways required to have the project completed by this Friday, and we are required to have all outstanding invoices paid by this Friday. So I've been frantically scrambling with Mr. Electric and Two-Way all day today and all day Friday for them to get their final invoices to us. So the first one is for Mr. Electric. It's purchase number order 1468. It's for $1,212.62, and that will come out of the FEMA reimbursement line item, and that is for the, to hook up the electrical from the base up there up to the repeaters being installed by Two-Way.
All right, I move, we
Move purchase order number.
move purchase order number 1468 to Mr. Electric for the electrical hookup for the radio repeater.
In the amount of,
$1,212.62. I'm gonna need your glasses for that.
isn't that one 1,000, okay, I thought you said, okay, you did say 1,000, okay, you did something else, sorry.
Second,
Okay, we'll do that. Okay, yeah, it's gonna be. You'll have everything,
Okay.
tonight, we're gonna approve these tonight, we're gonna look to Caroline. We'll have everything, I can come in midweek and sign checks if I need to,
That's all I
if we
need.
approve them, I'm.
That's all I need.
Okay, but we'll be able to
Otherwise, yes.
make this happen by Friday so we can get the grant money and then by, okay, perfect. Any other questions? All right, so, all those in favor of purchase order 1468, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right. And this was covered by, it's part of it's FEMA, is that what you're saying, but part of it's also the,
It goes back to 2017, to the original warrant article
Warrant
number
article,
12. And the original, two ways I did that, the original purchase order, two-way, separately. Okay, save the big one for Denise.
Oh,
Two-way
she lucky.
communications. Purchase order number 1467, the second half of the bill for the radio repeater, $10,400. This can be connected with the original purchase order, which was 1314, issued back on November 6th of 2017, in the amount of $23,545. Excuse me, thank you.
All right, I'll move purchase order 1467, two-way communications, radio repeater. This is coming from the FEMA account as well,
Correct.
for $10,400.
Second?
Okay?
Any other questions, concerns?
Well, I just have a
Yep,
question.
Of course.
I'm directing it to Caroline, if I may. How does that, with 2 different years, how does that work? Did the money get,
It was rolled over because it was, when we can identify ahead of time that things are not
Okay.
spent but approved,
Come with the money.
particularly in
Yeah.
warrant articles, the auditor can deal with that
okay,
in a limited, we just try not to do that.
okay, thank you.
Extenuating circumstances here, so. Yes, we try not to make a habit of it, but every once in a while it has to happen, so. Any other questions, comments, or concerns? All right, with that then, all those in favor of purchase order 1467, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed? All right.
Do you need to see it?
Do you need this,
No.
Simon?
No.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I submitted the 2019
Yes.
proposed budget to you folks for review.
Yes.
And I imagine at some point in the very near future, we'll sit and discuss it.
Yes.
I mean, obviously, I wasn't going to do it tonight, but,
No.
so. Just as a reminder, again, whatever pay raises come will be based upon merit as opposed to just across the board pay raises for everybody.
Okay.
So,
So for next week, we'll carve out time on the agenda to go through the budget. We have a workshop Saturday, but there's a lot more to worry about than, I'm not trying to say just the police department,
Sure.
or just highway, or just fire, there's
yeah,
everything else we gotta worry about. So we had a lot to work on just that day, so
I'm sure.
we're not quite behind the 8 ball yet. But next Monday, we will be prepared to go through the budget with you and hopefully George and fire, so.
Okay, that's all that I have for you folks. Anything for me?
No, thank you.
Saturday went well.
Awesome,
That was great.
yes, I think it did. I was really very happy with it.
I should have said that when all those people in the room, but yes, it was
Yeah.
the best one yet.
Yeah, I
It
think
really
so.
was.
People-wise, anyway.
Yeah.
You know, people hanging
It was
around.
shorter
It was
amount of
shorter,
time,
and
but.
that's why they were there.
Yeah, exactly. It's hard, I think, to spread it out throughout the whole.
Mhm.
It was
So the
fun.
plan is, next year, same
Best
thing.
fireworks
Yep.
around.
I
Honestly.
heard them.
You heard of?
Do you want the key to the planning room return?
Are you still on the planning board? as a
I
member?
am as the ex officio.
Keep it.
Okay.
Yeah, keep it for now.
And then I have to go rifling through the desk in the other room to find the key.
Right.
Yeah, really.
When
It's in
someone
my
needs it-
top
when
drawer,
someone
well
needs-
labeled.
Yes, it is, yes, it is.
I don't get
I
it.
shouldn't say, it's not anything you've done, it's that usually in the middle of a meeting, we need more chairs, and I've gotta try to go find a key, so.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bobby.
Very
Good
nice.
night.
George, you're up. Now, if anyone didn't go down and touch a truck, any of George's vehicles on Saturday, you don't know what I know. So I'll let George tell it.
I know something. I'm hoping it isn't bad.
And I didn't do it, but I didn't touch it, but. I broke it down there, so. Go ahead, George, with that setup.
Thanks for that.
Yeah.
We got a letter from Morton Salt for salt for this coming winter,
Mm-hmm.
and it's slightly gone up, it's up to 55, 54 for 1,000 tons of salt.
Did you say Morton?
Morton, yeah,
As in
just
like
like,
table salt?
just like the
Same
Morton
company.
Salt Girl.
No kidding,
Yeah,
really?
that-
I didn't know
does it.
that.
It's the best, look at that, it's right there, look at she is with her slicker and,
It is.
rubber boots and umbrella. It always makes me chuckle every time I see it.
Yeah.
I wouldn't advise eating this salt, but you know, salt. So per ton, just so everyone knows, so right now Morton, if we go with Morton, they're suggesting it's gonna be 55.54 per ton. In the fall of 2014, it was 52.65, then it went up to 54.38. It's all right here.
Okay.
And then, but in 2016, it was up to 58.27, and it went down to 53.80 last year,
Yeah, it's up a little.
and now it's up again. So this is not every year it bounces up and down, fluctuates at least $2 every year. Some, in one case, almost 5, so.
That's 4 or 5, but July to next July.
So, yeah, so we will, I'm gonna do you wanna hold on to this, or do you want Caroline to hold on to it? When do we have to let them know by? Well, if we wanna go with them or not?
Do we
There's
have
also-
options?
I suggest the sooner the better.
Okay, what's the other, is it New Hampshire?
Granite.
Mineral, whatever, Granite State Mineral? Do we have a quote? They're usually way higher, so, they have been in the last several years, so.
The state one is it's just under that. It's not, but
So,
apparently they've been treating people,
well,
the product is better.
well, this is what we've been told in the past, is that the product itself is better. That the stuff from Granite State Mineral
Some of it's
was
outside.
very wet, and so it would just freeze up and chunk up, and it wasn't as useful in our machinery as that quote unquote superior product from Morton. Have you seen that to be true? I mean, you don't have experience with the other stuff, I guess, but
We use Morton and Berwick.
you did, okay.
So why would we wanna get something that isn't?
I don't
as
think
good
we
a
do.
quality? Oh.
I don't think we do, but I mean, George is the expert, not me, so I wanna, you're the guy putting it out there, not me, so if it's working the right way, I don't want us to gum up our machinery with the other stuff.
There's not a problem with them, we call them, we get it.
Okay.
You know, at least that's the experience I had with them last year.
Okay. And so your recommendation is to stay with Morton?
I would do it, yep.
Okay. All right, so the minimum order is 32 ton. That doesn't mean we actually have to use 32 tons, we just have to reserve, right? No, the minimum order is you have to have 32 tons. Our order last year, so both of you, you were here through one of these cycles, but I think, right?
Mhm.
Okay, so you haven't know the joys of ordering salt, okay. You have to tell them what you anticipate you're gonna use. You don't necessarily have to buy, what was it last year? 464 tons, that's a lot of salt. But if you don't reserve that, what you think you may use, what happened a few years ago to a lot of towns, I don't know if we were one of them or we were close to being one of them. They run out of salt down there at the state pier. Wherever else they're bringing it in, there's the state pier in Portland, wherever they're bringing it in. And if they don't have it there, they don't have it here. But if you reserve it, you're guaranteed out of that allotment to get what you need versus another town that may not have, only said they needed 410, that extra 10 tons.
Reserved means pay for?
No, we don't have to actually pay for it, you
Okay,
pay for
yes,
what you
you get
actually
it.
use. But you have to give them your
Your estimate.
estimate, I mean, it's a good faith estimate. We don't typically go that high, but they understand that too, that it could be a more mild winter, or it could be worse, and we might actually need more salt, God forbid, but,
Okay.
of course.
So they're basing their delivery for what the towns and cities are saying that they're gonna use.
Roughly, yeah.
If we have a mild winter and it isn't used, what happens to that?
You don't have to buy it.
But what happens to the product? I
Sits at
mean,
the pier.
it sits on the pier, I
Whatever,
mean,
yeah,
so
lost.
it would be there for next year?
Yeah, them.
I mean, they have a means of not, for it not to get melted or whatever.
They keep it covered, a lot of them keep it, they keep it covered more so than, you know, I mean, you don't just, it's all covered, but apparently Granite State's had some issues where the plastic's blown off and the water